Welcome to this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, a forum for retail leaders to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities.
This is Anil.
And this is Fabi. And each episode, we invite some of the brightest minds in the industry to discuss the future of customer centricity, with topics ranging from the rise of e-commerce to brick and mortar operations, to omni-channel technology to retail culture, and how all of these elements come together to create customer-centric retailing. Today, we have with us George Nahra, Retail Strategy and Consumer Insights Consultant at GZN Consulting and Advisory Board Member at the Retail Analytics Council. George has deep expertise in developing and successfully executing complex retail strategies that place the consumer at the center of the shopping experience. Welcome to the podcast, George. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. There's so much for us to talk about in the retail industry with you. It's hard to narrow it down. But to get us started, I know that you've written and posted extensively about the bankruptcies that are happening left and right in the retail industry right now. And you tend to write about the underlying issues that resulted in the bankruptcies, because it is so easy to blame Amazon or the pandemic without really looking at the root causes. And of course, all of these factors exacerbated it, but it's usually not the only factor. So I'm curious, kind of in your view, what are the main causes of those bankruptcies? And is it really mostly to do with the pandemic or with the rise of Amazon, or is there something else there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, it's been really easy to blame the problems in retail, most recently to the shift to digital and Amazon and the pandemic. And, I think this has been discussed pretty extensively in the press, but you often read about this notion that the pandemic was just an accelerant to underlying issues. If you were going to use a cliche, you could say that the pandemic sort of exposed the warts that were already existent in the industry. But it's been pretty amazing to see the impact of the pandemic on the industry. I read a few weeks ago, according to the CoStar Group, 40 major retailers filed for Chapter 11 last year, and over 11,000 stores were closed, apart from the sort of the temporary closures that were required if you were non-essential. So it's been pretty it's had a pretty profound impact. But I think, to answer your question, I think there are a couple of things that have been going on, and I don't think these are this sort of list of reasons is necessarily mutually exclusive. But first of all, I would say that I think the first root cause is not having a compelling competitive advantage. And so, do you have an advantage over your peers that's compelling to the customer, and that it sort of enables you to sort of build a moat around yourself relative to the competition? Why should a customer choose you over someone else? And again, how defensible is that positioning? I think that's probably one of the key reasons where you see retailers that are struggling don't really have a purpose, a clear purpose for being, and a clear sort of pull, if you want to call it that, for a customer to shop in their stores or shop online. I think another thing is maybe even underlying to that rationale or that issue is losing sight of the customer. I think a lot of times decisions end up being made, and this is I'm not throwing stones here, because I think that the decisions being made outside of the customer are fine to some extent, right? Whether it's financial reasons or competitive reasons. Or, I think, you've probably heard a lot about retail, sort of call it the LY syndrome, which is just looking at last year and, incrementally improving upon it or building upon it. But I think a lot of times what I've seen both as a consultant and frankly being in-house is decisions are being made without considering what the customer wants or needs, what her preferences are, how she shops, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that that's sort of a pretty significant issue. A couple of other reasons and that I would just touch on would be, one is just relying on new stores to fuel growth as opposed to focusing on the performance of your core store base. Um, I've seen this, over the last, probably 10 years or more. But when you read and review sort of analyst calls and where retailers sort of talk about, executives talk about performance over the prior quarters or prior years, if you think about how often you will read or hear executives say that their assortment was just not compelling, right? Which is sort of if you pause and think about it, is sort of an amazing thing for executives to say over and over again, right? I mean, and I've worked at retailers that have said the same thing, and so I'm not saying that businesses that I've worked with are immune to this, but if you're primarily in a business, that you're sort of delivering, apparel, you're supposed to be delivering a compelling apparel and accessories assortment, and you say over and over again, we missed a trend, or we overemphasized a particular portion of our assortment that wasn't compelling to customers, or how does that happen, right? And so I think that's another issue. I think we'll probably talk about this later, but I think letting store experiences get stale is another sort of concern. Not investing in and refreshing your physical experience is problematic. And I also think, lastly, I would say, there's certainly been, and I think this is fair, a lot of buyouts that have been that you've seen in the retail space that have burdened a lot of retailers' balance sheets with a lot of debt, and it's just been difficult for them to service that debt. Of course, the reason why it's been difficult is because they haven't focused on the customer. They don't have a compelling competitive advantage. They don't have a compelling assortment or whatever that is. But I also think that certainly a lot of these balance sheet issues have contributed to the problems.
One of the issues that you brought up that I definitely want to talk a little bit more about is how a lot of retailers have let their store experiences really decline significantly, and it's become
Yeah.
boring and it's become unappealing. And I know that you've personally worked with a number of retailers to develop omni-channel strategies that kind of blend the online and offline worlds. And there's quite a bit of debate kind of raging in the industry right now about what place physical retail should really have, and if it should still have a main place, or if digital is really going to completely take over the next couple of decades. So I'm curious. So, because of the rise of digital, do you still think that the role of brick and mortar is still going to be strong? What do you think that role is going to be?
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually think that, first of all, I would say we've all read in the press the significant amount of influence that digital and mobile plays today, and I believe will continue to play a role in let's say, the path to purchase. I think depending on the source, anywhere from 60 to 80% of all transactions, whether digital or physical, are at some point influenced by digital. It's again at some point in the journey, and so we shouldn't. I don't think I want to be clear that my response here is under this notion that digital is hugely important. But I think historically, retailers have taken a physical first approach to their business. And I think given the importance that digital and mobile are playing in the path to purchase and loyalty, you've sort of got to start with a digital or mobile centric approach first, and then how do your stores sort of complement, I think is probably the best word I would use, the digital experience. And so I actually think that for the brands and retailers that can get it right, the physical experience might actually become a competitive advantage for them. And so I think you've got to understand, or you've got to think through, what is the value proposition of your physical experience. So why should a customer come to your store in the first place versus just transact via mobile or digital? And so if you think about, I think if you think about that, whether it's your customer service, or the assortment, or the ability to even all the omni-channel services that retailers are offering, or perhaps as many retailers are trying out more experiential things, like whether it's restaurants or cafes or whatever it is. But I think the point is to say, if you think that a customer is just going to come to your store for the same old plain vanilla experience, I think you're kidding yourselves. I think that there are a lot of retailers, and even not just retailers, like Nike, Nordstrom, Starbucks, even, and many others, are sort of reimagining their footprints through the lens of digital. I think Starbucks is completely reimagining their footprint to accelerated by COVID, but with a stronger focus on pickup only locations, because they know that customers will just order from the app, and they don't need to sit down and enjoy their coffee in a location. They just want to pick it up and go, and so they're adjusting their footprint appropriately. I think Nordstrom is taking I would call it almost like a geographic sort of centric approach to their footprint. So they're looking at the behavior of their customers within a major metropolitan area, and they're building out their footprint with a couple of different prototypes to reflect the behaviors and the preferences of the customers in that area. They've got obviously they've got their Nordstrom local format that they're rolling out, and they're adjusting the format of their full line stores as well, again, to reflect the behaviors and the preferences of customers in that area. Nike's doing the same thing. I mean, they've got several different prototypes that they're rolling out. So I think it's again taking a customer centric perspective, understanding what your customers want from your store experience. Number one. Number two, I would say, is ensuring that your physical footprint complements your digital experience. And three is understanding what the value proposition is of your physical location. It's not anymore just a place to transact, where a customer comes in, tries on a product, and buys it. It's it's obviously a sales center. It's a return center. It's a fulfillment center, right? Because as stores are becoming mini distribution centers, it's perhaps based on potentially your brand and your customer preferences. It's a place for customers to explore and become a community. So I think there are a lot of different ways you can take it, but I think it's again, customer first, digital centric, and building out, ensuring that there's a true value proposition for your physical locations.
Wow, this is amazing, George. What you gave is like, hey, it's time to accept the reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's time to accept the reality, right?
I mean, I think it's, I was actually reflecting on this yesterday, because I read, I can't remember where it was, but I read an article about this notion that Costco doesn't offer curbside pickup. And geez, how could that be when their competitors like BJ's and Sam's Club are offering it, and everyone else is offering it. Big box, grocery, even specialty apparel, they're all offering curbside pickup. And so the question is, well, why doesn't Costco offer it? It seems so obvious. And I think the answer is probably I don't think we know the answer, because I don't think they've told us why they haven't. But I think it's probably a combination of a couple things. Probably one, their customers don't aren't asking for it is probably number one. Because if they were asking for it and not delivering it, I think presumably Costco wouldn't be performing that well, right? So I think most likely their customers aren't demanding it. And, I think practically speaking, it's probably a logistical challenge for them given this just the size of the, of their, of the things that they sell. I mean, they offer obviously large bulk size products, and so that could be a challenge. But I think it just goes back to my point of the customer centric point of view and having a clear value proposition. So for Costco, if they don't think the customers or they know customers aren't asking for it, and it's not clear what the value proposition would be of offering curbside versus asking customers to come into the store, then they shouldn't do it. And so I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think if you focus on, if you know who your customer is and you focus on what she wants, within this sort of umbrella of, digital centric, offering a clear value proposition, I think that's a start for a compelling physical experience.
Yeah, I think, with these modern buying experiences also, for example, what you said, the digital first, or rather I should say mobile first kind of approach to, analyzing your customers' buying experience, what they want, their needs. I think it even more applies to apparel, fashion industry, specialty brand retailers more than to the, these multi-brand or even these, basic necessities or wholesale companies like Costco. And this is why, like for example, if my daughter had to go shopping, she would look up if the store has this item in stock, whatever
Right.
she wants.
Right.
She would check first. So, for them, the store starts from the phone. They start engaging with the store on their phone, and then they go into the store and start the shopping and all that stuff, right? So like you said, it's important that it's like, they have these 4-dimension or 5-dimension theaters where they would have this movie, but then there's a sprinkle of water coming out of it.
Right.
So essentially, like you said, the stores are another dimension to our buying experience. So the buying experience starts, and we travel our journey on the mobile, and then store comes in and adds that physical experience to it, which is like, I want to take a look at, try on the product, feel and touch and feel and experience, and maybe talk to somebody there, or maybe visit there with my friend, or whatever it is. But store is not purely just as a traditional point of sale.
Right.
It's not like, go run a transaction there. It's not about transaction. It is about experience in the store.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think retailers have got to, and I think many are taking that approach, at least in theory. I think it's harder in practice, but to your point, it's understanding. I mean, I think you sort of illustrated a mini, case study of understanding who your customer is. And let's say your daughter is the target customer. How is she shopping? Okay, I think, she's starting from her mobile phone. She's researching, she knows what she wants, right? And so she's looking up a particular product and who has it, which is a different journey than, what if she doesn't know what she wants and she's just exploring? And how does that journey differ from a journey where she knows what she wants? Like, she wants a dress for a particular occasion. Okay, I need this dress. I want it to look like this. I'm going to search online. I'm going to discover. I'm going to figure out who's got it in stock, and I'm going to go to that store, and then I'm going to try it on, and I need to buy some complementary accessories and shoes or whatever. And that's how it, versus, I just feel like buying a new dress. I don't know exactly what I want. I don't have an occasion in mind, so I'm just going to go browse and find something that I think looks great. But that's a different mindset and requires, perhaps a different engagement model for both physical and digital than it would if she knows exactly what she wants. So I think it's thinking through the journey through that lens and through those lenses. I almost feel like the role of physical becomes almost obvious if you start with the customer point of view and think through the different paths to purchase that she might take, and then you think about knowing that most likely it's going to start with digital, and then you think about how the physical experience can complement that. I think that's the key, as opposed to, perhaps legacy approaches, which would just assume that the store is sort of the central point of discovery and commerce, right? Which is not the case today.
Yeah, and in fact, in this situation, clienteling comes into the picture, and I really want to talk to you about the clienteling and modern clienteling technologies and get your ideas on what are those effective ways of applying technology in the store, and how the store can effectively help these modern customers, the customer that we have today.
Yeah, I think that, and I've had some experience with some sort of digital clienteling tools that basically, let me know if this is what you're referring to, but basically enable. I would call it, sort of digitally enabling store associates to engage with customers in a way that is natural for them. And so it's usually through mobile phones or SMS, and it's understanding what the customer. It's really getting a deep understanding of a couple of things. One is what's in a customer's closet today, which requires obviously technology and visibility into a closet to build that out. What the customer's preferences are, so it's knowing what it's trying to build out a picture of what that is, and perhaps what the customer's purchase history is with you as a retailer. And if you understand what those things are, and I would even say, on top of that, if you can build out a point of view of what important occasions are in across the customer's calendar for, for example, birthdays, special events, graduations or whatever. And if there are tools that exist that would allow you to build out that picture, that can really help you engage with customers digitally and in a personalized way. So, hey, Sally, I know that your birthday's coming up, or I know your daughter's graduating in a couple of months. We just got in a new collection of dresses that I think you would love or your daughter would love for that occasion. Why don't, and this is through SMS, right? Why don't I set aside a couple of dresses for you, and you can come into the store and try them on. And we've got some great shoes or other accessories that would go well with that. And so I think it's enabling the store associate to engage with customers outside of the physical experience of the store, in ways that are natural for the customer, which again today tends to be through SMS or through some sort of perhaps digital chat function, and less perhaps email, pardon me, less phone, and just ways to engage digitally outside the store. I don't know if that's what you were referring to. So I think thinking through, Nordstrom has a tool like that. Chico's and its brands, have leveraged that sort of tool, and that's been sort of, they've discussed that publicly. And so I think those sorts of tools, I think, are helpful in creating a digital-centric clienteling solution to deepen engagement with customers in ways that are relevant to her.
With the bringing in of the clienteling app, what we have seen is that we are now, the associate can actually connect with the customer at one-to-one.
Yeah.
And then it takes away a lot of those hassle from the buying, including trying on product and from there on to just completing the transaction, right? You don't have to stand in line or whatever, because those associate can be with you while you are, trying products and finalizing the sale and completing all the
Exactly.
purchase.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Because the whole buying experience is all about fun. Why would I why do you want me to stand in line for 15 minutes carrying everything in my hands so I can check out?
Right.
I think something that we've said a couple times now is that retail stores are just not mere points of sale anymore. And so they're fulfillment centers, they're media tools. In some cases, as a result of this pandemic, especially their community gathering places. And so,
Yep.
in our view, measuring sales per square foot is just no longer an adequate way to determine the success of the brick and mortar because customers really don't see it in terms of channel anymore. There's very few interactions, as you noted, that are really purely brick and mortar or purely digital. They could be browsing online and then they come to the store to try something on and then they order when they get back home. So who do you really attribute that to? So I'm curious, in your opinion, if you have a strong opinion on how retailers should measure the impact of their physical storefronts, if that old playbook that they've been using just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. First of all, I think that standard productivity metrics and even comp store sales are useful tools, useful measures, but probably not 100% relevant in and of themselves, right? And I don't know that there's a single metric that would replace either of those, but rather I think it's probably a collection of metrics to help understand the full picture of the relevance almost of your physical locations. And so I would first say, before talking about some of the potential metrics you could use, I would say, going back to the value proposition of your stores and understanding what that is. And then with that in mind, building out the metrics to measure your performance against that value proposition. So, for example, if you are a Starbucks location that is a mobile only pickup, right? Your measures of success are probably very, very different than if you are a full experience Starbucks location, right? So if you're a mobile pickup only and you're not worried about dwell time, you're not worried about the length that maybe the length of the queue, you're not worried about other things like that. You're worried about throughput, perhaps, order error rate, and other things like that. Versus, again, the metrics might be different if you are a full-service Starbucks location. So I think the first thing would be start from your objective or the goal of the location, and then build out the metrics that best represent your performance against those. Having said that, I think there are a couple of things that you could consider. One would be traffic. And so I think almost regardless of what the value proposition of your location is, if you're not driving footsteps through the door, you're probably going to have a tough go, right? Unless your store is unless it's a dark store and you're literally just using it to fulfill online orders. I mean, that's probably the only instance where I could imagine traffic wouldn't be relevant. But I think understanding your traffic patterns and your performance year over year is important. Secondly, I would say, are you driving some level of engagement in the store, right? So once she crosses your threshold, are you engaging her in some way? And that could be a sale on the location. It could be, she's picking up a digital sale, even if it didn't, start. Even if the sale didn't start inside the physical location. Is it a return? Is it an exchange? Perhaps it's more driven by experiential commerce, classes, for example. I mean, maybe she's coming to the location, like maybe you're a Lululemon location and you've got classes in your store. You've got a yoga class. And so one of the measures of success would be, traffic perhaps, but what percent of the traffic is driven off of classes versus pure commerce? And so I think it becomes a more nuanced conversation, but to your point on your question, which is it's broader than just productivity, because maybe if you're Lululemon, you would love a customer who comes in for a yoga class to buy something, but maybe that's not the only measure of success, right? It is to say, if Lululemon is concerned with community engagement, for example, and customer engagement, maybe they're okay if a customer comes into the store for a yoga class and doesn't buy anything. because she's connecting with other customers in the store. She's building a bond with the yoga instructor who presumably works at the store. And so it's more about the long-term engagement and loyalty of the customer, and less about whether or not she buys something that day, before or after that class, right? Is the store profitable? Obviously, that's going to continue to be important. I also think one thing that I've done as you look at decisions to close stores, right? And historically, it's been you look at an individual location and you decide, whether or not that store should be open or closed. I think that, in my opinion, probably a more robust way to think about it is looking at, again, I talked about this earlier, this notion of looking at a major metropolitan area and deciding whether or not that metro area is profitable and the role that a store plays within that metro area. So, for example, you may have a store, like let's say, for the sake of illustration, take the Houston metropolitan market, and you've got 12 stores in that area, and you're looking at one particular store, and you're thinking to yourself, "Geez, this store is performing really poorly in terms of productivity, right?" But maybe if you look at customer behavior, you realize that, I'm making this up, 60% of the traffic in the store is driven off of store returns and exchanges. Okay, well that might influence, maybe you need to repurpose the value proposition of that store. And it's less about, there's something about the location of the store that makes it convenient for customers to come in and return or exchange product. And so maybe that will influence the prototype of the store, the size of the store, the way you staff the store, the opening and closing hours of the store, right? But it's important to have a location there because customers find it convenient. But it will influence, for example, to your point, the metrics that you use to determine success of that location, and to our earlier conversation about the value proposition and the prototype of the store, what that store looks like. So I think taking almost the Nordstrom approach of a I'm going to look at the Houston market as a whole, and determine the role and the goal of the stores in that, or let's call it the physical locations within that market, as opposed to the Houston Galleria location in and of itself. It's important to look at the ecosystem and how customers engage in the total market.
I like the geographic or regional approach there. I think that's really
Yeah.
smart. And that's something that we typically like to recommend as well, because that kind of blends the online and the offline. If people are going in store and then ordering online, it picks that up. And so store associates can get compensated for that as well, even if that actual sale isn't happening in store.
Right.
I think something that we've been talking about, and I'm thinking for the retailers listening to this episode, it can all sound a little bit overwhelming, right? Thinking about all of these different ways that we can rethink our stores and do it differently. And it sounds very different from what we actually see in the malls and on the high streets that we're going on right now. And so I'm just curious if you have any advice for retailers as they kind of begin that process, begin rethinking their stores or their store network strategies, their store formats to allow for these omni-channel experiences, or to become more customer centric. Do you have any advice for how they should really start that journey?
It's a great question, and I think ultimately it will depend on the circumstances and the positioning of any particular retailer or brand. I think probably the one bit in common, regardless of who you are, is to ensure that you understand who your customer is and what she wants from you, relative to your peer set. And so I think that, you might be surprised if you ask the question, how few retailers really understand their customers in a deep way, and understand what their compelling competitive advantage is in the market. And so I think if you, I think one of the common threads throughout this conversation has been going back to who your customer is, what she wants, and from you, and how you're delivering against those expectations. And so I think it's really about starting from that sort of lens, and then working out from there, because then you can start thinking about how is my digital experience lining up against my target customer and what she wants? How is my physical experience lining up against my target customer and what she wants? How does that compare to my competitive set and how I'm positioned against them? Why is she going to shop with me and not someone else? So I think and that's not easy to do. If you don't have a customer centric point of view today, I think building that out is not necessarily easy, but you can do it through research. You can do it through using behavioral data from your transaction database to help understand. But I think having that core capability of being able to know and speak with your customer is really, really important.
George, then the real question is like, in my conversations with retailers, right, or in general, they are customer centric,
Right.
or like many retailers think that they are customer centric. So I think we should come from the other side, and should we talk about how do I know if I'm customer centric or not, or rather I should say like what are the few things that I'm doing which means that I'm not customer centric. Because if everybody was customer centric, we would not have so many bankruptcies that we talked about earlier. And this is where I have the curiosity.
Yeah. I think it's a great question, and I think in my experience, this comes down to, and I apologize because this is very tactical, but I think that this ends up being, it can be very instructive and pretty eye-opening, which is to say, how do you as a retailer make day-to-day decisions? And so what I've done in my past is I would literally sit in meetings in which executives or even mid-level managers are making decisions that are customer facing, whether it's to keep a store open or closed, whether it's deciding on the assortment for the upcoming season, whether it's reviewing performance metrics from the prior week or month. And I think if you were to just observe the way that they talk about making those decisions and note the metrics that they use in making those decisions, most of the time, or I should say, rarely will you hear the customer or customer-centric metrics being used. I think is it Amazon or it might be another retailer. Maybe one of you guys know, where in every meeting there's an empty chair in the room, and the empty chair in the room is meant to be saved for the customer. And so when they're in meetings making decisions, it's very easy for them to, because there's literally a conference room. Well, there was, I suppose, before COVID. You're sitting in the conference room with 10 people making a decision, and there's an empty chair sitting there. So it's a very tangible reminder to ensure that the customer, you're basically saying the customer is sitting there, and are we making a decision that is benefiting her in some way, or that we're taking her preferences into account. And I think, and I don't know if you've observed this yourself, but I have, very surprising when you say, the decisions being made, again, because of, well, we did this last year, or the operating margin is not hitting our threshold for a store, or we're gonna create a new feature set on our mobile app because it's easier for us to execute or whatever. And you don't hear, the sorts of things you'd expect to hear if you were making a customer-centric decision. So you might expect to hear, well, based on customer data, the decision would be XYZ. Or, yes, the operating profit of the store is not hitting our threshold, but customer data suggests that, she's still coming here for her returns or exchanges. Or, whatever, or, qualitative customer feedback implies that, rather than an off-the-shoulder top, she really likes short sleeves and she doesn't like cold shoulder, whatever it happens to be, right? Those are the things you'd expect to hear if you're making customer-centric decisions. And again, I think you'd be surprised at how infrequently you hear those sorts of things.
I really like that approach with the empty chair. I don't know which retailer that is, but I'll have to look it up because I think
look it up. Yeah, I think it's Amazon, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to stay grounded and stay in touch with your customers because I think it's really easy for retail leaders to kind of become really removed from the reality on the ground, and it's hard to put yourself in that mindset when you are so removed. So I think that's actually a great place to end it with that great piece of feedback and advice for retail leaders. And we want to thank you so much for your time today. It was great having you on. And kind of as we wrap up here, it'd be great if we could conclude by just telling the audience what's next for you and how they can keep up with you also.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I am enjoying consulting, and if I can find a full-time role somewhere, that'd be great. But I like to keep a sort of broad perspective. And you can, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I try and put out articles from time to time or points of view if I think that they're incremental and can add some value. So you can definitely find me there.
Yeah, absolutely. George posts a lot about the posts I enjoy the most: the bankruptcy post, the customer acquisition post. Some great insight there. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, a very special thank you to you for joining us, and to our audience. We really do recommend that you follow George on LinkedIn.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, George.
That's it for this episode of the Customer Centric Retailing Podcast with George Nahra. George believes that the pandemic has just been an accelerant for the demise of retailers that haven't been taking their customer experience seriously enough to continually innovate and evolve. In order to survive or even thrive, you need to recenter around your customer and find what stands you apart from the competition. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please rate and review and recommend to a friend or fellow retail fanatic. This podcast is brought to you by Hot Wax Commerce.